Welcome to the Imperfect Pastor podcast. I'm your host, Zack Eswine, and today we're looking at chapter 15, and our theme is leadership. In this chapter, we talk about things like training leaders, developing a culture in our church or organization, making decisions, handling what C.S. Lewis called the inner ring. I'm so happy to have Jamin Roller with us today. Jamin, thanks for joining us.
I'm honored to be here.
Jamin, let's just begin by letting our listeners know a little bit about you, the ministry you serve, your family. What would you like to tell us to orient us?
I am a pastor at a church in Plano called Citizens Church, and our church was previously a campus of a larger church, and we became our own church back in the fall of 2019. I think it matters because we've been a church for I think going on 6 years now, but we've been a congregation for almost 11 years. So
Mhm.
it's been a yeah. So I've been with this congregation for over a decade. Um, been married to my wife for it'll be 17 years this month, and we've got 3 kids who are just a profound gift to me. So yeah,
Oh, good. Let's think about this big picture question just to dive in. When you read this chapter, what are a couple things that stood out to you, and why do you think it matters for ministry leaders?
yeah. I think there is a immense pressure as a ministry leader. Simple way to say it is to just get things done. There's
Mhm.
a
Yeah, yeah.
immense pressure to have answers, to constantly be moving. And I remember reading in Eugene Peterson's biography, and he was talking about how they just done a big building program at a church, and they had built and or renovated or something, and then paid off the debt. And then there was a bunch of energy, and for a few months, people came, and then it started to die off, and people lost interest. And Eugene Peterson was talking with a mentor about it, and he said, "What do I do?" And the guy said, "Well, you need to do another building campaign." And it's this idea that that kind of leadership where you're and it's good and it's right and there's space for that, but it's that kind of always ahead of the need, always offering these very real airtight solutions. I have just personally struggled being that kind of leader in my short time as a ministry leader. And so this chapter, just that simple call to shepherd leadership, ministry leadership, church leadership is different than business leadership. It was just it helped to reorient my heart around what we are doing and what we're not doing.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things we talked about in there is Godspeed and how the way the Lord works is often slower
Mm,
and often more overlooked, often seems inefficient to us, and
mm,
because he's shepherding people. Um, and you just mentioned the difference between sort of that shepherding approach and what good businessmen and women are accustomed to each day.
mhm,
What have you been learning about how to help faithful businessmen and women adjust to the way the bottom line is different when they're at a meeting at work from
mhm,
when they're at a meeting at church?
mm. We had a conversation a couple years ago, and we were in a place at a church where we had needed to make some decisions, and we were growing in numeric ways and just growing deeper as a people of God. And the question, and I don't know who was asking it, but the question I felt a pressure to answer was, um, what do you hope is true about the church? Where do you see the church in 5 years? And I always feel so overwhelmed by those questions, because I'm usually stuck trying to answer the question of what do I hope happens on Sunday. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And we had a conversation. What you said to me was, I don't know um, how many shepherds, like actual shepherds, are having to answer the question, "What's your 5-year vision for the sheep?" That I think it's more of a daily vision of providing for them, protecting them from threats, being among them. And I think that when I think about for the team that I lead, for the elders that I lead alongside of, and then even just people in the church that are seeking to do this the Jesus way, um, that turn from present faithfulness. That lesson of knowing how much of the future to open your hands to, um, and the opportunity, the real opportunity today to honor Jesus, to love people, to lead people. I think maybe that's what I'm trying to get at is the biggest shift is the shift away from dreaming for what could be to seeing what already is and being as excited and energized in what already is as a um as like a sustaining source of life and energy behind not just leadership but behind just a following of Jesus.
Yeah, there's a paradox there, isn't there? Present faithfulness to the people who are in front of you,
Mm,
day by day, week by week, actually uh, leads you to future vision you wouldn't have thought of yourself. You know,
mhm,
um, uh, it also leads us to a more informed future vision because it's flowing out of the people we know. It's
mm,
local knowledge rather than imagined something, and and it also frees us from trying to know the future,
mhm.
um, as you're saying. Yeah,
3 years ago, our church just experienced a numerical growth in a way that we were out of space in our Sunday services, and um, there was just a lot of excitement around that, and um, that, it- we don't lead towards that as necessarily being a goal. We don't like my face isn't on a billboard somewhere around
yeah.
town, and we don't send out, flyers or anything like that.
And if I ever see one, I'll just give you a call. How's it going, brother?
Just send me another copy of your book.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Like, hey, don't
Yeah,
forget about
your
this.
PR person will say, "I'm sorry, he's busy now."
Yeah, right, right. So kind of quite unexpectedly, and we started growing, and there was talk about, do we add a third service, or do we, um, do all the options were on the table. All the options were on the table. And what we decided was to enter into a season of just prayer and seeking the Lord, and we called it Seek. And it was maybe 6 weeks of we gathered uh, once a week and prayed every day as a church. And here's what I thought. I thought in that time, someone was going to give me a call, or one of our elders a call, and say, hey, we have an empty church building we'd like to give you so that you can start a campus. And now that's part of our church's story, actually, is that
Yeah,
kind of thing happened, and the Lord, met needs. And
yeah.
um, that didn't happen. We also didn't get a tremendous amount of clarity on whether or not adding another service would be a good thing or not. And so
Mm.
uh, we this isn't entirely true that after that season we just didn't do anything at all. We just and But what did happen is in that season, people naturally just offered their experience of our church, how they met Jesus at our church, and they started to describe for us what the Lord had been doing in their life. And we kept hearing the same thing from different people, different experiences and different stories, describing our church as a place where they found healing, and describing our church as a place where, Jesus is just, front and center. And what we thought was going to be a season of, Lord, you're going to answer this prayer in a very tangible way, was actually a season where the Lord just helped us see his hand at work among us, help us find language for what he had done. And the biggest takeaway from that was, Lord, you've been so kind to us in ways that we don't feel like anyone is responsible for except for you. And we want to do our part to treasure and protect that. And that season came to mind in reading the chapter, of just to say there was a way to rush to a decision but
Hmm.
just the grace of God to slow us down, um, and to find something that uh, was maybe not as tactile that came out of it, but just as, if not more, important for us, I guess.
It's I could imagine someone listening, Jamin, and saying, "It seems like a no-brainer you would add space. This is part of the gospel mission. You have numbers growing. You want to steward the numbers of people. Of course, you're going to add space." What I hear you saying is you guys slowed down and asked whether that's what God would have you do. Uh, can you explore that a little further? Like, what is it that you see that causes you to think it isn't just growing in numbers and creating space? We would have to account for other things if that happened. And so we need to pray about this. Like, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, candidly, um, yeah, it's hard to know. Our leadership community here at Citizens is there are not a whole lot of leaders around here who are like take the hill leaders.
Mhm.
Um, and in ways we need that. In ways we've actually tried to, um, you know, grow in that. There was already a natural kind of spirit among
Mhm.
us of let's take our time. Um, and we had gone through a wisdom series. So much of that, this was your influence on my life and our church's life. But kind of the three truths that have stuck since that series is wisdom has a posture, it's low, and then wisdom has a pace, it's slow. And the Lord has really held us to that wisdom slow pace. So that was a lot of part of the conversation is that um, we could drag our feet and be bad stewards of what God's doing. That's true. But the danger felt more like we would rush out ahead and do something in
Mhm.
our own strength.
Mhm.
I think the question was if we don't want to create space for more people to come if we're not confident that we have the culture and the discipleship pathways for those people to actually be invited into a journey of Christ likeness. Um, I think we also looked around and what we were hearing from staff is we're tired. We had been through this long season of starting our church and then COVID. And I don't know if you know this, but that was a season where everyone got along and no one disagreed about anything. And that was really easy on
Oh, yeah,
church
that was my
leaders. And
experience too,
yeah.
right?
And so we had this unexpected growth that came kind of I don't know. We're in Texas, in Dallas, in the Dallas area. I think we were a part of the world that was ready to get back to normal earlier than others were. And so what that meant was a lot of people were ready to go back to church earlier than others. And for us, that meant a lot of new people. And there was zeal and excitement around that. Um, but adding something in that season feels like it would have placed a weight on tired legs.
Hmm.
And we didn't want to do that. Um, yeah, we didn't want to do that. We are in a season now where we're prayerfully asking the Lord for a campus. We were a campus of a church that became its own church. We're very committed to that convictionally as a church planting strategy. And we're in a different place now than we were back then in terms of help and readiness. And so it's I guess what I'm trying to say is I think there's a season to slow down and say no, and then there's a season to speed up
Yeah.
and um and be zealous for the mission of God. So that feels appropriate to offer kind of the spectrum of it.
Yeah, the one gives us the direction and the empowerment for the other.
Hmm.
To have slowed down and listened is what enables us to have clarity about where we need to go forward zealously. And could sort of think of it as a strategic pause for, passionate mission,
Mm, mm,
When
mm.
you were talking about tired legs earlier, that's so important and insightful. It makes me think of Solomon's son who divided the kingdom in 1 Kings 12 when he became king. I think it's Rehoboam when he became king. Um, the folks came to him and said, we'll serve you faithfully, but we're tired. Will you please
Mm,
give us a break? And the wiser counselor said, yes, do that. But the younger counselor said, no, show him who's boss.
mm,
And Rehoboam, instead of taking a long view, giving them a break so that they could go forward, he showed them who's boss and divided the kingdom. And um, there's something about practically for us in a church where we're numerically growing, we begin to think about space, we begin to think budget connected to space. Sometimes we overlook the budget that will also be needed to increase staff,
mhm,
to increase training for leaders so that not just the space can accommodate the people, but like you said, discipleship pathways and persons who can disciple
mm,
are
mhm,
available for
mhm,
that. Otherwise, uh, all the same amount of work that was done before is still asked of the same amount of shoulders.
mhm, mhm,
And yeah, that's so. When you said there's something about your leaders, you named temperament. There's that by temperament, you have a leadership culture that has a capacity for slowing down and prayerfully considering. Is there something you do in your ministry training when you train leaders and when you're seeking to cultivate a culture at Citizens Church? Is this a part of your training, or is it picked up along the way? Um, yeah, how do you think about training leaders?
We have two elder candidates right now. And in reading through the chapter, our process is very similar to the process there at Riverside in terms of a lot of slow, a lot of one-on-one conversations. And at the same time, we are actively, we've actively selected elder candidates that we think will help, bring some more of that. Um, I can't remember the way you just said it, but the the passion and the push and a kind of wise press. But I think to answer your question, it's maybe more caught than it is taught. But we do try to stop along the way and name it.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
we're not as disciplined in this as we should be, but we'll spend a portion of our elder meeting doing praying for one another, breaking up into smaller groups and doing accountability. And at the end of that time, someone will make the comment often, "Hey, that was not independent from our work as elders.
mm,
That wasn't like the thing we felt like we had to do so that we could get to the real work of eldering. That was we just eldered, and maybe that was the best eldering we'll do all night. Is that time that we spent together?" And um, you know, we've learned that from others, and there are a couple of long tenured leaders in that room that fight for that kind of thing. Our church also began in a season of crisis and difficulty, and so it would be uh, the most honest thing to say is some of the things that I have come to value most about our leadership community have come as the result of suffering and difficulty, and we would not be who we are without it. And that's just the the God's kingdom economy that the thing he allows the thing that you think would ruin a place and it ends up refining a place. And that's our story. um and so I don't know that we have as many of the mechanisms that we need to cultivate that, but I do know there is a shared appreciation for it.
mhm.
And this is very specific, but I just did my mid-year review. I'm not Speaking of temperament, God gave me the kind of temperament that does not love things like mid-year reviews. And so, but we ask our team to do them, and so I, gladly submit to that process. And our mid-year reviews are just, you list out three ups and three downs. And one of my ups was the unity of our leadership team. Um, we were at a event recently. It was a church planting network and a conference, and um, there was a guy that was kind of talking about the churches that are in the room, and he named, the lead pastor of that church, and then the church's name, and then the lead pastor of another church, and then that church's name, and then when he got to us, he said the guys at Citizens,
Hmm.
and I was so
Mhm.
proud of that moment that no one person holds the reputation of our church, that there's a reputation of plural shared leadership. And what's behind that is friendship, like genuine friendship. And the Lord has just gifted it to us. And I feel a burden more than anything else. I feel a burden to protect it, um, because foolishness, the flesh, the enemy would just love to rob us of that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and in the story that you're telling, just if our listeners haven't connected the dot, you just said two things. The Lord has gifted this to us, and you also said your leadership in the beginning of your church was born out of suffering.
Mm,
And there's the gift that you have together of being bonded the way you are and protecting it, stewarding it, cultivating it in intentional ways, was given, but not on a sunshiny day. Uh, it was given when a storm came,
mhm,
and and that connects too to what we were talking about with present faithfulness and future vision and how those things go together. Because you had a future vision, of planting a church, and then an unexpected storm came. Not unexpected to God, but unexpected to you. And all of a sudden, you're thrust into present faithfulness.
mm,
And and yet here you are years later saying, "This is our story,"
mhm,
and it informs how you think about present faithfulness together, and how that shapes how you do future vision. you
mm,
know,
mhm,
yeah.
mhm,
One of the things that we're hinting at all along here is decision making. We've been talking about it subtly along the way. In the book, we talk about, at the time, I wrote it as a decision making triangle. What's the right thing biblically? And then what would be the right way and the right time to carry out that right biblical thing?
mhm,
Since then, I would add, um, the right people, the
mm,
wise people. Do we
mhm,
have the wise people that we need? So
mhm,
I guess that'd be a decision making square.
mm.
But we might also add, and why are we doing this? so, so
I don't know what
uh,
shape that is.
I don't know. That's not a dime? I don't know what it is. But anyway, uh, when you think about, okay, the wise thing, do we have the wise people? What would be the wisest timing? What's wisdom's way to go about this? Um, in your experience, which step do we tend to skip over, and why do you think that might be?
Timing.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's because, to go back to the beginning, I think it's because of the pressure to answer the questions and solve the problems, and and a people who, well intentioned, have an appetite towards that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So if I think about, do you add a service? There's a way to say, of course, you do. There's people around here who need Jesus, and we care deeply about that. And we live in a part of the state where um people are leaving other churches, and there's a way for that, I think, to be done poorly, where it's like just church shopping and kind of, consumer Christianity. There's also a way where there's like righteous refugees, where there are people who, because of their commitment to the Lord, and I mean that metaphorically, a righteous refugee
Yes.
from, they're looking for a church home because the
Yes.
place they called home has abandoned the gospel, or
Yes.
started to emphasize other things. And so we feel the need for all that. and we feel like God has positioned us to be able to uh, be a church that welcomes shepherds and leads in that. And so, why would you not, of course, add a third service? And it's like the seashells metaphor where it's like the one guy you can't. Anyway, I can't remember who told that, but he throws the one thing back into the ocean. He's like, it mattered to that one, even though I can't help all of them and I can't clean up all of it, I can't save all the lives, but that
Yeah.
one, and that's a powerful image for what can motivate a pastor's decision making. Um, I think there's also a way to ignore, neglect the things that aren't as loud, but that if neglected will end up, not to overstate it, but ruining your life. Like the First Peter 5 passage that you mentioned in the book about the qualifications for elders. We just finished preaching through First Peter, and there's this funny thing where this is an aside. I will often preach sermon series after you do. And so y'all did First Peter at Riverside a couple months ago. But what always ends up happening is you somehow figure out a way to preach it in like 8 weeks. And it takes me, we started it in January and just finished it last Sunday. So anyway,
That's
I've got to
great.
figure out how to be more concise in my thoughts. But so we were in First Peter 5 a couple weeks ago. And I just thought about the shameful gain. Um, and how I've experienced in my own life what it looks like to lead out of shameful gain. And that can be a desire for power, that can be a desire for money. But there's also a way to do this from a place of guilt where you're trying to lead the church of God to atone for your sins. And the problem with that is my experience in ministry is that the longer I minister, the more exposed I feel. It's like Paul when he writes at the beginning, I'm the least of the elders or the apostles. And then at the end, he's like, I'm the chief of sinners. His experience as a ministry leader is the longer I've done this, the more of
Hmm.
my sinful heart I've seen. And um, there's ministry is not the place where you atone for your sins. That's what the cross of Jesus Christ is for. But if you minister from that place of guilt, you don't have a category for slow down. Because if I stop ministering, then that means that God stops loving me. And I just think that has to be a conversation we can have around. I can talk myself into one more service and have all kinds of really compelling arguments for it that agree with the Bible. I also need voices around me to say, okay, what might happen to your own soul if you do? Is this the right time for that? Are you in the kind of place? Are we in the kind of place where we could lead for that? And I think to try to bring it back to the beginning, I think the timing question, it is the category that makes space for those kinds of conversations. It's not, is this wrong to do? And it's not, would this work even? It's, is it right now?
Huh.
And I just feel like when you introduce that as a question, the question about timing has a way of just slowing the conversation down. And then all of a sudden people start saying things like, well, maybe, um, maybe there's a whole side of this that we just haven't talked about. Yeah.
Yeah. It brings us back to present faithfulness, that
Hmm.
question.
Hmm.
That's what I'm hearing. Because now, of course, it's the right thing to do. We know that biblically. We could see the impact on our community, on our church. Is this the right time? Now we're reflecting on the season that we're in. What season are our leaders in? What season are
Hmm.
our people in? How would this impact us? It brings us back to that tired legs question, or to what you were just describing, motives that might be more out of shame or guilt, and without taking the time to assess things like that, we wouldn't have caught it. Uh, uh, but by His grace, now we do. and we realize, okay, yeah, that is good. How does by the way, on the sermon series, um, I might preach shorter series, but you preach shorter sermons, so I think that's what it is. I think folks are having to bear with me trying to get everything in that amount of time.
Well, I can
You're
only
you're
handle
wiser that way.
watching a certain amount of people fall asleep while I'm preaching. So I realized if I cut it off at 30 minutes, there's more people awake. Yeah.
That's good. Uh, one of the things we're hinting at here that comes into play with decision making and timing is also a critic.
Mm,
Uh, when we're making decisions, we could be criticized for asking, is this the right time? We could be criticized for asking, what's the right way to go about this? Because it can be assumed once you know is this a biblical thing, then there's nothing else to ask. But what we're getting at, but there's a biblical way to do a biblical thing. And when we're criticized, that can speed us up too.
mhm,
It could also slow us down, shut us down.
mhm.
What have you been learning about navigating criticism?
That I'm bad at it.
Me too. We can start a club, the Bad at Handling Criticism Club. Yeah.
I think I've experienced both sides. I've experienced a desire to speed up because of criticism. And then I've experienced a reticence to act out of fear of criticism. There's a because there's a way to spiritualize rushing something, and there's a way to spiritualize the lack of action. You
Hmm.
know,
Mhm.
and I think if I try to dig into the a lot of that in my own life has just been a defense mechanism. I don't Things are going really great right now. If we make a decision, if we do something new and it fails, who am I then? How is that going to feel then? Um, I think there's a difference between a critic, uh, and you don't really know the source of you can't really trust the source of the criticism. Maybe it's a godly desire coming out sideways. Maybe my dad, who's been a pastor my whole life, he told me early on in ministry, criticism is almost never on the bullseye, but it's almost always on the target.
Hmm. What a helpful
So
saying. Yeah.
there's some wisdom to find, even in a malintended critic. And I try to think about that. Um, but and I use it as a defense. I'm like, hey, that wasn't on the bullseye. Just kidding. Um, but I think about the profuse are the kisses of an enemy, faithful are the wounds of a friend. So if I have not welcomed the wounds of my friends, then I am way more affected by criticism. In other words, it's like, don't think anyone's gonna, if I've got healthy friendships in my life, I don't think anyone's gonna tell me something that surprises me that a trusted voice has not already brought to my attention. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and that it's it doesn't make it easier necessarily, but it does make things I feel more settled in. There was a time when I was, Adam. Adam is one of the other pastors here. We lead citizens together, and there was a time when I was, frustrated about something and complaining about something, and I kind of thought that what he would say back to me is like, "Man, you're doing a great job, and I'm so sorry," and all that. And he did say those kinds of things, but one of the things he said was, "I think you think you're more important than you are," and he said it kindly, and he said it with with a soft, trusting voice. But it was the thing. It was a wound
Mhm.
but it was a faithful wound because it was the wound of a friend. And he was right. It was like so much of how I was feeling internally, a consequence of pride and a consequence of self-exaltation. And it's like, hey, if there is joy for you to be had in this, uh, if you stop overstating your importance to this place, you know? And shortly after that, I had somebody who shared something similar to me, but not in a kind way
Mm,
and not
mhm.
in the safety of friendship. And I got to tell them, yeah, my friend already told me that. And it's like that I don't know that it took the sting out of anything, but it did there was a foundation, I think, from friendship that was laid that helped me know what to do with that. Because as a leader, it's just so hard to know what's true and what to trust. And it's like, in a given, not a given week, but in a given morning, somebody can say something like, "That's the best sermon I've ever heard." And somebody else can say something like, um, "This is our last Sunday here," you know? And it's like, goodness, how do you I think Keller says, don't let compliments go to your head and don't let criticism go to your heart.
Hmm.
And um the only way I know how to navigate that is to not try to navigate it by myself because I don't trust my own thoughts about it. Um yeah.
Yeah, that brings us to something else in the book. We mentioned the inner ring. This is language from C.S. Lewis.
Hmm.
And an inner ring, as he describes it, is a community of people that, as a younger leader, we want to be a part of. Um, and there's good mentoring to be a part of. But then there's an inner ring, which somehow the mentoring's gone sour. Like, in order to remain part of the group, you have to be exactly like the group. And so a young leader, out of fear of that kind of criticism, um, will lose their own voice, uh, be afraid to to differ or to invite a conversation about something different because it won't be accepted by that group. Um, when you think about ministry as a younger man in a ministry where you are now, what have you been learning about the difference between the wounds of a faithful friend, the wounds of a critic, and then wounds that can come from a community of people you long to be a part of, but realize you're different, and would you still be accepted if you express that?
Mm.
What have you been learning about that?
Well, there's probably a lot more to say than just this, but uh, in my experience, I got what I wanted
Mm.
relationally. I found that acceptance. Um, People that I really, really, really admired said things about me that I always wanted them to say. And it didn't help me. It didn't help me.
In what way? What do you mean by that?
It's water through your fingers.
Mm.
It's like I was just so confident if I could please these people and if I could be this kind of preacher, pastor, and you said this to me a couple years ago. There's no disappointment in life like when your dreams come true. And my inner ring dream came true, and I felt lonely and inadequate, um, and so it's like, and I think there's a God-given desire for community and friendship. It's not good for man to be alone, you know. And but but how that is satisfied and how that desire is actually met is very different than being impressive to the people you're impressed with. And um, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I learned it the hard way. Um, I also think that there's a lesson that I've had to learn where um, I there is a kind of loneliness in ministry that is preventable, and some people do ministry all alone and they don't have to. Um, And so it's a kind of loneliness that's like if I'm not honest about my heart and I'm the only one that knows how I'm feeling, if I'm the only one who knows how I'm being tempted, and if I'm the only one who knows about my secret sins, then I'm going to isolate myself and I'm going to be alone. I'm going to feel alone because I am alone, and that's preventable. But there's also a kind of loneliness in ministry that is a vocational hazard. Um, there's a kind of loneliness in ministry that is felt because it's real. Th- there are certain responsibilities and spaces that I have had to step in because I was the not because I was the only one with the gifts to do it or the ability to do it, but because God wanted me to do it. And I was the one that God had appointed for that moment. Times when I stood in front of our church and shared things, and I was the one that needed to share those things. And I was alone in that, in a sense. And what I've discovered is when I'm able to differentiate between the loneliness that's preventable and then the loneliness that is real, that's a part of the role, then I look to my friends for the preventable loneliness, but then I look to Jesus for the unpreventable kind. Because the reality is when I'm in that place, if if I'm trying to blame my loneliness on others, then I just sit with my own accusations and criticism and all that. But if it's like, no, this is mine to do. God has given me this to do, and I'm the only one to do it, at least in this season and in this moment. But Jesus' parting promise to his disciples is, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And so even in those places, I have it's Richard Baxter. He said, he who has the warmth of the sun is never without heat, though all his candles be blown out. And it's that, yeah, even in those ministry places where there are no candles, there are no friends, there are no people around, we still have the warmth of the sun. And oh gosh, I'm grateful for that.
Amen. Jamin, it's hard to believe we're already at the end of our time, but I can't think of a better place to end thinking about Jesus and basking in his love for us, even when all candles are blown out. Someone listening might really need the Lord in that way. Would you close us out by praying for
Yes,
them? Yeah, thanks,
yes.
Jamin.
Jesus, you are the hero of the church, and everything you've ever done has always been the right thing at the right time in the right way, and you were the right person. And so just confess how limited we are, and confess how grace needy we are. And then also just celebrate that you are the one who is leading and building your church. And for all the pastors listening, the best day of ministry is not like the most full Sunday we ever have, or the best Bible lesson we ever teach, or the sermon that we knock out of the park, or the decision that we make right. Our best day in ministry is when the chief shepherd appears and we receive the unfading crown of glory. And that glory is just the joy of getting to say for all of eternity, Jesus let me be a part of what he was doing in his church. Like a father who doesn't need the child's help, but lets the child help, not because they need their gifts, but because they enjoy their presence. And
Amen.
that's you, God. You let us do this, not because you need us, but you enjoy being with us. So would that sustain us, God? Would that sustain us? Um, would we grow in wisdom in these things, and trust you, uh, the present faithfulness that would cultivate a vision that pleases you, Lord God. We love you and thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Jamin.
Yes, thank you, my friend.